Thank you for hosting. Thank you for coming here. Hopefully you can learn a thing or two tonight. That would be my goal. In terms of introductions, I'll start on the personal front. So I live and work in San Jose, so I love the city, love Sharks. Although, to be frank with you, being an underdog myself, kind of them versus Golden Knights, you don't know who to root for. But I still rooted for Sharks, so and I also root for Barracudas, which also lost playoffs. Luckily, we have Warriors, so to make up for the rest. So I'm a dad of two. I love my work. I love my two boys, and I love tinkering with robots, and I also love competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if any of you know what that is. So that's me in a nutshell. A couple words about the company. So we are growing very fast. So far we have close to 600 employees worldwide. Headquartered here, we actually just launched a beautiful new building in downtown San Jose. Had our grand opening, had Mayor Sam Liccardo come and help us launch that. So growing here and growing worldwide, we've got about 16,000 customers in more than 100 countries. So that's going pretty well. What the reason for our growth and the value that we bring to our customers is, I'll give you kind of a little metaphor, if you will, or concept how I look at things. So if you think about digital economy, you start with in this creative chaos phase, like you do in your daily work as a startup, right? And at some point, once you figure something out, the beauty of the digital economy is you need to scale it rapidly. And that's when you need the platform to better manage and oversee that work. So a lot of our customers are startups that are in that scaling mode. Some of them are world's largest enterprises that are in the similar scaling mode. They have their new digital product that they're scaling, or they're digitizing existing operations. So again, when you're small, 5 people in the same room, you could use anything, to be frank. I would prefer you to use us, but you could just as well use whiteboard or something like a spreadsheet. But once you hit that note and you need to scale, and when you're doing hundreds of projects or campaigns or buildings or however you call it, a quarter or a month, that's when you need a platform like us to survive and to sleep well and to make sure that the trains run on time. So, and we basically grow with our customers and with digital economy. That's a big part of our growth.
You're talking about earlier kids, things like that, and I started my company when I graduated college, my first of 3, and I think you started Wrike shortly after college as well, and how things change. You have kids and things like that, and you make these sacrifices. I know I was here a week ago, and I coached my son's Little League team, and 1 minute before I go on stage, I get a text saying, my son just hit a grand slam, not a home run, a grand slam. And you're just like, oh, there was a life moment I just missed. Fuck. Yeah, it's like, oh, Jesus. So those are the things that, as founders, you just work through, But talking about the history a little bit, you didn't grow up here. You grew up in Russia, immigrated here. A lot of our founders at Founders Floor, also grew up at different places and came here. This is kind of really the mecca for startups in a way. And I don't know if that's how you felt as well. How was that process moving here? I mean, leaving all your friends, colleagues, and having to, build those new business connections and founding a company at that same time. How was that process like for you?
For me, it was exciting. I was really looking forward to it. I kind of dreamt about Silicon Valley when I was a teenager. I always got excited about building things, and I always was excited about how do you scale things to kind of at their global scale. I saw Silicon Valley as the place to be and to learn from. And so, and by the time I moved, I was actually, I was kind of a global traveler. I lived in Russia, but I traveled all over the world for customers, conferences, this and that. So I was really excited. And for me, it was the hardest things was friends and family. Like the rest of it, I'm sort of I was digital native, if you will, already. So I literally took a duffel bag, credit card and shorts. Luckily, you don't need to carry a lot of a lot of coats when you move here, and snow boots unless you wanna ski. But so their move itself was fairly easy, and exciting. Kind of a lot of new opportunities to build those connections, to learn. And one of the things that I love about the Valley, and that I leveraged at the beginning, and that you're leveraging now and could leverage, is that people are very open, and so when you come, it's very easy to learn. There are a lot of peers, there are a lot of people who've been there, done that, and so you could either kind of use one-to-many learning sessions like this, or sometimes you can grab a coffee with somebody. And generally, again, people are fairly friendly and open, and they can tell you about how they've done it. And so that was amazing and inspiring, and allowed me to kind of learn quickly.
Yeah. What a lot of our audience members, are founders or entrepreneurs that are, soon want to start their own company, and so they love kind of hearing, how successful founders like yourself came up with the idea for their company and how they kind of got it off the ground. So with Wrike, how did you come up with the idea of Wrike, and in those earlier months, how did you kind of help just get it off the ground?
So Wrike is my second serious business, if you will. And the first one, which grew to more than 100 engineers and was multi-million profitable, was basically a professional services organization. So we did work for hire. And that's one of the reasons why, again, I traveled the world. So in that business was also growing very fast. Basically in services, it's very linear. Like you do great work and extra work on top of that, and your business grows through referrals. So it was growing with our customers and through referrals. We didn't do any like miraculous sales or marketing. It was just growing by us executing well. And so with that growth, I was managing multiple functions. So I was managing recruiting, which was key to that business, and that was good school for my later career. So recruiting was key. Managing of those projects and delivering on time was key. And so I had to oversee very different things. I had to oversee them across multiple projects, and that's where I felt like I was drowning in spreadsheets, Microsoft project files, emails, SharePoint portals and stuff. I needed a system where I could log in and get the picture across everything, right? So if I needed to see what Joe has done over the last 2 weeks, I'd be able to see it. If I needed to see where my VIP customer projects stand, I should be able to pull it instantly. If I need to drill down and solve an issue, I need to have the information right there in context, rather it being scattered across instant messages and emails and sort of files that leave who knows where. So that's where I just felt the pain myself, and I wanted a solution. Very important point though is that I was not just building custom solution for myself, right? So it wasn't like, hey, let's build internal tool and then somehow it transitions into external. I did realize the pain. I did realize that it's big, and I wanted to build a solution for everybody. So right from the beginning, we were not just building, like custom ugly tool that gets us there. It was more like, let's build the right solution that's scalable. It's a great product idea. I always wanted to build a product business, because once you build services business, at some point, a little dirty secret if you've never done it, you started as a technologist, and that's why you're successful, because you love your work, and that's why you do go that extra mile, and that's why customers get extra value. But once you scale it, it's no longer a technology business. Professional service organization, it's about client management, recruiting, and project management. So at least the last piece was, all three pieces are interesting, but again, you lack that technology and that drive and that exponential scalability. So I had a good idea. I had good skills. We were, me and my team, we were very, very early in their what later became known as SaaS and Ajax. So basically, we were building for our customers SaaS solutions before there was a term SaaS, right?
And it was ASP, right?
Yep. And then we were also building fully dynamic interactive apps, while most sort of website and pages were static. Like hit refresh, you get your new data, maybe, who knows. And so that's where I had the technical skills and I had the right idea, and I felt, okay, I build services business, it's working well, let me try to build product. I know it's harder, but it's also more fun.
You And I think, for the first 5-6 years, this was a bootstrap company for you. And and I tell our founders this, if you can bootstrap the company, that's the best way to go, not to take outside funding, and sometimes that can be a blessing in disguise, because, if you're able to get to a certain level where, you've created those success metrics, then when you go to raise, it's under the terms that you kind of dictate with investors rather than vice versa. That doesn't make it any more easier, though, because it's hard at those early years. How was it for Wrike? Was it a choice to bootstrap initially because of just what you wanted to do, or was it most of what most startups fall into, which is at a necessity you have to bootstrap?
I think it was both. So I say, like, as a person who just moved into the Valley, and 12 years ago, the Valley was similar to what it is now, but also a little bit different. So I wasn't like an ex-Googler. I wasn't Stanford grad. Nobody cared about the fact that I had built business somewhere else, despite the fact that it was like multi-million engineers, unless they knew the name and unless it sort of clicked with them, like nobody cared. So for them, I was like a no-name dude with a heavy accent. Well, not heavy, but still with some accent. So I didn't necessarily see people running to me with the checkbooks, and I figured that maybe who knows, if I invest a lot of time, maybe I'll be successful, but I could just as well as invest that time in building the product and acquiring customers, and ultimately they'll give me the money, right? So I always kind of internally, and we got a couple of Wrike employees here, internally I like to say that customers are our first and best investors, right? So that, again, literally the same amount of effort. Neither is easy, but I felt that's more sustainable long term, because even if I do raise the money, I still need to acquire customers. So but I still obviously kind of build the relationship over the years, and it's funny how the world sort of goes around. Like I literally just met the other day with a guy who I pitched, 8 years ago, and now he's very interested today. So it's kind of a little bit different sides of the table right now. So, but it helps because I was always polite and cautious, and I always delivered more than I promised. So even though in those original conversations, even the people who didn't write their checks, some of them are kind of good acquaintances of friends, and some of them will write down the check later. So I wasn't averse to investment, but I also wasn't necessarily like viewing it as my singular priority.
Yeah. In those earlier years, how did you? Because I remember those years. I was doing my second company about that time as well, and it wasn't like there was events like this. There wasn't books really necessarily. There wasn't podcasts. There wasn't YouTube videos you could read galore about tips and tricks, and on how to acquire users and how to, generate early revenue and feed that back in the company. How did you think about this at the start? How did you kind of prime the pump, so to speak, and get this started?
So I went with my strengths. So I've got engineering background, and for me that led more naturally to digital user acquisition rather than sort of enterprise sales, if you will. And so that's more of a quant way of doing things. And so we built very sophisticated online acquisition, and at right now some of our competitors are catching up, but we had several years of lead time on them where at some point, up until today, we would be bidding on hundreds of thousands of keyword combinations, would run hundreds of landing pages, would do through the year thousands of A/B tests. Eventually, we also built machine learning behind it to predict the revenue from the lead, so we could feed it early into our bidding strategies, and so we would be smarter. Like there's an old saying in advertising, half of your advertising dollars is wasted, or if only you knew which half.
Yeah.
Right. So that predates digital marketing. I forgot who said it, but it's an old saying. So we kind of knew where it's wasted and where it's not, and so that helped, and it didn't happen overnight. So just to make that clear, but we were always doing what I call test and scale, right? So I'm a big believer in agile. So I've actually one other thing that I've done early. I had a luck to be part of an agile team in 2000, where Agile Manifesto just came out, and back then, I don't know if you remember, it was extreme programming, and then sort of it later morphed into Scrum. So, but I really lived that philosophy through the business, and we will maybe talk a little bit about investments as well. But we definitely applied that in marketing. So it wasn't like this necessarily genius vision and millions of dollars. It was more like, I want to put $1 in, I want to get $3 out, I want to put that 3, I want to get 9 out, I want to, and so on and so forth, right? And a lot of optimizations where you're constantly doing a lot of tests and learning, and based on that, you're scaling. So that appealed to me, and that appealed to my strengths and my team strengths, where we were good with engineering and kind of managing complexity. Eventually, and we can talk about that later, we did layer in more traditional marketing and traditional sales. But for several years in the company journey, for a lot of years in the company journey, we literally had no sales reps. Like, nobody in the company was commissioned on sale. It was all done through online acquisition.
Yeah. And that was new back then, honestly. I mean, that was like the Box.net type strategy at that point. No Salesforce, because honestly, who can afford it at that point? Early stages. So in those earlier years, especially when you're bootstrapping, and being in the project management space solidly at that time in the early years, there starts to be competitors coming into the marketplace, and sometimes those competitors, for whatever reason, can raise money. And all of a sudden, that lead that you had over them becomes very short at that point. How did you guys manage that? Because I'm assuming others in that space did raise, and there was psychological pressures and company pressures. How did you guys work through that?
Well, I had the benefit of experiencing a lot of pressure, so at some point you stop caring. So I lived through 2 financial downturns, and all of you, I see a lot of gray hair here, so it's like, who cares if somebody raised whatever, $20-50 million? Like, it's not the end of the world. So when I started the business, there already was a company called Basecamp, which back then was all the rage. Like, all their startup press, all the business press, like, it was the hot new thing, so everybody knew about it, everybody wrote about it. And kind of in relative units, they're probably, in terms of their brand recognition, relative to other players, they probably were bigger than anybody else today, like including us, including our direct competitors. One of them, by the way, went public a week or 2 weeks ago. So like I started with that already, and it was funny where I actually charged more for my product than they did, right? And there were like friends who shared their friendly advice and like, why are you charging more? And I'm like, well, because I'm providing more value. Right? So, and I was going back to that bootstrapping strategy. I was kind of believed, I'm a very direct person, so I always believed that customers should vote with their money. And I would be delusional if I would be saying, hey, my product is better, but nobody wants to pay more for this compared to the other player, right? So I felt, hey, I'll build a better product, and I know exactly why it's better, and because it's not just surface level, it's not bells and whistles, it's like fundamentally in Basecamp you could not get visibility across those multiple things. Basecamp looked pretty nice, but it at their core of it was very similar to SharePoint. Like, you had a website per project, and God bless you if you try to get visibility across running multiple projects or multiple functions. So I fundamentally had different view on what work management platform should be, and I believe that if I provide that value for the customers, then they would vote with their money. So and that's a long story, but it answers your questions. And later, when competitors came to market that are more directly trying to copy our model and raised a lot of capital, I'm like, all right, I've kind of been there. I've competed with much kind of in David and Goliath way. So now you're trying to catch up with me. Good luck. Good luck there. But there were sometimes scary moments. Like I remember before we got any funding, one of the competitors came out and announced that they will offer a freemium plan up to 30 users back then, and our average account size back then was 10 or 15 users. So you're looking at it. Well, okay, that is going to be a challenge. That's interesting. So it was less about, for me, it's always less about funding, because you fundamentally see a lot of companies who raise a lot of capital and then quickly burn through it, and sometimes it actually hurts them more than helps. So for me, it was always less about funding and more about market and product. Can you differentiate enough from your competitors, and not just on the PowerPoint, but in the customer's eyes? Will you be able to persuade your customers that your product is significantly better? And luckily, we were always able to do it. So the name of the game is always staying a couple of years ahead of your competitor. If you don't raise funding, you can't choke them out, so they will still grow and will still kind of breathe in your back. But again, as long as you're a couple of years ahead on the product side, you will still be always able to grow and grow even faster than they do.
I totally agree with that, and what I'll just add to that is a fact. At the end of the day, it's all about execution for the company as well. And so, good luck. Raise their money, whatever they want to do. At the end of the day, they're going to have to go through the same process as you did, maybe accelerated, but they still have to make those micro decisions to be able to find the success path that's the same as you did. And as long as you keep innovating and they keep innovating, you're always going to have that lead like you're talking about. So let's see. So, bootstrap for the first 5-6 years. And then you raised like a seed round for $1 million, I think, and then what was it? About a year after that, you boosted probably the internal metrics up of the company to the point where you can then raise that Series A, a 10 million Series A, and then 3 years after that, you raise a 15 million Series B. At what point, I guess the basic question I'm going to ask is, why raise the Series A and Series B? In other words, if you get to that point where you've been bootstrapping and you created the hockey stick, which is super hard to do. It's like winning the lottery, honestly, to be able to create the hockey stick so you can build off your own profits. And so you raise that seed, and that makes sense, but then that Series A and B, tell me more about the thought process with that.
Series Seed versus A is an interesting example. I told you that I believe in agile philosophy, so I actually approached it in the same way to funding. So, but back then, based on our size, we should have raised like $20 million, right? Instead of it, I raised one to just see how it goes, if you will, and it was going good. We were accelerating. We were able to deploy that capital, and then I raised then into the company that sort of gave us another boost. So, and that boost was very helpful. One unfortunate thing is that in the Valley, people do look at a funding as a measure of success, which I hate. It should not be. Like your measure of success should be your customers, your product, your revenue. The amount of money you raise should never be a measure of success. Unfortunately, kind of people use it as a proxy. And so it did help us in the way that I used both that capital and just the fact of it to bring on very experienced chief revenue officer. Together, we built sales organization on top of that inbound funnel. Together, we 10x the business over the next three years. So it was very good story. Again, I tested it a little bit, and then I felt comfortable doing it. And for me, another good thing is I really like the investors. So they're still on board. Indy, who's been there since day one, he's one of the biggest advocates for our vision in a broad sense of the word. He sometimes does a better job than I do selling that vision to the world. So they believed in vision. They believed in me, which, again, back then we didn't have any fancy offices. We were like in Class C building around the block. And kind of they, Bain Capital Ventures, they got amazing office in Boston, and so they come to this kind of funky office, and they had to have some guts and believe, but they saw a common pattern. They already by then invested in a couple of land and expand business. They were also kind of pioneers in SaaS, and they also believed in my vision of connecting the work and people together. So that went really well, and also there was good chemistry between me and the fund, where none of us kind of nickel and dimed each other. It was a good deal for everybody. I always believe in that when you do investment, because you like over optimize for the valuation. Like you want everybody to be happy. You want you to make money. You want your employees to make money, and you want your investors to make money. You don't want to kind of skew it into one direction and screw the other part. So it was good chemistry, and was a helpful step. And then we did a couple of raises after, but we were always doing it fairly unconventional, in the sense that in the Valley, it's common to raise their largest amount of capital you can raise, versus we always fought really hard to raise their lowest amount of capital we could raise. So the last raise we didn't even announce, because it was less than 5% of equity, versus a typical venture round is at least 20% of equity. And we've always done it on their very clean terms. One thing that happened in the unicorn age, a lot of companies wanted to get to $1 billion valuation, and so they threw in some funky terms, which I can later educate you, somebody else can educate you on, to boost the valuation. But again, it screws the incentives on the board, so we always went for very, very clean terms, and I always was very adamant with investors that we want to be in the same boat, so kind of it's clean terms or nothing, basically.
You spent half the company's life, it felt like probably to you, bootstrapping the company, being lean, mean, and thinking of acquiring companies very, aggressive, but cost-effective way. And then in a short amount of time, you did raise a good amount of money, $10,000, $15,000 or more. And how did that change the way you ran the company? Did it at all? Did you acquire customers differently with that? Were you thinking about product development maybe differently, where there was features that you decided to invest in, from a development point of view that you normally wouldn't have prior, or?
So we definitely went faster, and that's why we wanted to raise. We always had the ambition. I like to say that I have high ambition and low ego. Yeah. So I always had the ambition. So to go faster, to do more, and we used the capital, but without changing the philosophy. So it wasn't, okay, now we raised $10 million, so we'll hire 30 reps from Oracle or Salesforce and sort of go all in or broke, right? So it was still the same philosophy of test and scale, just applied now, for example, to sales, right? Where literally our first sales experiment, where we measured how much it costs us to sell and how much value it adds on top of kind of e-commerce, if you will, and it was a positive balance, and we went with it. So we were very methodical about measuring. Like I looked at their metrics on a weekly basis, which drew some people crazy, like, because I was very paranoid. Like if something ticks down, like I'm like, why the heck is it going down? And like if it's weekly, sort of that weekly discipline, again, it's not for everybody, but it helped us grow very fast, but also very consciously and sustainably. And culture-wise, I also think it was additive. This is one of the things that I'm most happy with and most proud is where companies rapidly grow, oftentimes the culture dilutes. Somehow we were able to actually strengthen the culture as we grew, and so that that is one of the things that again I'm most happy about, and we can talk about why and how later.
For the founders in the room who are ready to raise a larger round of funding for themselves, what are some of the pitfalls that they need to look out for after you raise that round of funding? What are some of the things from maybe a negative point of view, or that you just got to watch out for after you raise that round of funding when you're running your company? Like one of the things that popped in my mind was just hiring. I mean, I imagine the first however many employees, you had a hand in hiring every one of them. You interview them face to face, and then at some point you just can't hire everybody yourself anymore. And then so you start to lose a little control, so to speak. I don't know if that's one of them or not, but
yeah, hiring again. This I think was part of our success. We had the guts and the stamina to wait as long as we needed to hire the right person. And it sounds easy, but it's not. Like when you're under pressure, you need to deliver on sales plan, and you're like, okay, maybe this sales rep will do the job, right? Or maybe this manager will do the job. So, and it always bites you back 6, 12, 18 months down the road. And sometimes it did. So I'm not saying we did perfect on every single one of their hires, right? And again, we're at 600 employees. So there were people who kind of left the company, right, in the journey, but there were still a lot of hires where we were ready to wait till we get the right person, and it's, again, it sounds easy, but it's painful because you're overworked, you got more work than you can do. You also might be sometimes missing your plan, right, a little bit, because that other person would help. But it's very important to, when that happens, it's very important to, instead of give up on the bar, just double down on recruiting and sourcing and referrals, and just do a better job and trying to find that person. And maybe you can give up the bar on experience. I think that's more correct and better way. Like if you're cornered, you can lower the bar on the experience, but don't lower the bar on culture and kind of whatever your values are and whatever your key hiring criteria are. I think you should hold the line there. Again, there occasional situations where we didn't hold the line, and you're right, like in some of that case, like there was no executive involved in the hire, which shouldn't be. Like our policy is to get executives should review, at least especially at that stage of the growth, but occasionally we like let it go, and then it did backfire later. But in general, we kept a very high bar, and I still, up until this day, I review majority of our offer letters and resumes, and I do quite a lot of interviews. That takes a significant part of my schedule, and I also prioritize interviews a lot. So my team will hold me accountable for it. Like I would do, if needed, I will do breakfast on Saturday. I would stay later after work. I would move investor meeting if it's a key like candidate for executive position. I would tell my EA to move their investor meeting, but I would still meet the executive candidate.
Yeah. As you know, it takes a long time to build a really big company. I mean, I think it's 12 some years now, I think, where you're at, and that's the way with all big companies. And early employees, they join startups not always for the salary. They join it for the equity that they're going to invest over time. At the same time, we're in a kind of an economic situation now where there's not a lot of liquidity for those early employees. There's companies are holding back on doing an IPO or such. How do you? And that sometimes gets a little tough for executive teams trying to retain quality, employees, and also attract quality as well. How do you guys manage that and think about that?
So I'll share first my personal philosophy, how I manage myself, and then maybe I'll talk about kind of how I manage others. I'm always in for the long bet, right? So and sort of my equity is in the same position as employees, where I see it grow, and that makes me happy. Now that growth is obviously theoretical, right? So if the market collapses tomorrow or whatever, if there's catastrophic event, there's nothing there, right? But still, at least in terms of kind of metrics, like you see the business grow, you see the fundamentals improve, you see you're creating value, and so there is that long component. Now, of course, we all have our families, and kind of their cost of living and everything else. So you should cover the basis, and you should make sure. And internally, we have the philosophy of, but on the cash side, to be at 50th percentile, at least try to be at 15th percentile of the markets. If somebody is below, we try to catch them up. If occasionally somebody is above, we believe that it's high potential, and so it's worth it. But overall, company philosophies, we do pay for benchmarking data in the market, and we try to pay fair. But again, the reason there are reasons beyond the cash pay why people join the company. One is they get equity in the high growth company, and whether or not IPO is coming tomorrow or 3 years down the road, the equity still grows. It's actually sometimes it's the opposite. If you join in the startup that just did that inflated raise with weird terms at $2 billion, and 2 years down the road they're going public at 1.5. Guess how much equity you've made in that journey, right? So if you're joining early and the company keeps growing fast, you actually benefit by not exiting and staying. So there's equity component. The second component is when the company grows fast, it also opens career opportunity to either move horizontally, and some people like that, just getting new experience, and that is either interesting for them or is professionally beneficial for them, or opportunities to move up again as the company grows. And even if their title is the same, as the responsibility and scope grows, that's also growth in itself, right? So sometimes some of the roles, they're kind of very impactful. Like if you take a product marketing manager, right? You don't need an army of them. You don't need like hundreds of them, right? But as the company grows, their impact of their work grows with that. So that's the third, like their equity growth, their professional growth, and the third is just people and doing interesting work, and that's always stays the same. And again, as the company grows, that changes. Like going back to myself, my job today, despite the title being the same, my job today is very different from my job 3 years ago. So I enjoy the ride as much as Wrike's employees do.
I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. I have one more question, and then I'm going to go to the audience, so make sure you have your questions ready here. But I want to switch gears and talk about Wrike more here. You're a collaborative, work management platform for teams, and what does teams look like in the future, 5 years, 10 years from now? Startups absolutely use remote workforces, to build their companies up. Enterprises do to some degree as well. But what's it look like in the future for you, and how does Wrike position itself for that future?
There definitely is more mobility and flexibility. I don't know how dramatically that would change, because people still need that personal connection, right? A lot of startups that you host, they could work remotely, but there is a benefit in coming together and working. So despite me very much benefiting from the remote work, I still think people will meet in person. It's kind of interesting. When we had our office opening, we hosted a panel on future work with Eric from Zoom and also Tony Zingali from Jive. And so Eric, despite him, providing video conferencing software, he's kind of in the same camp as me. So like, you absolutely need video conferencing. It's going to be at every desktop, but at the same time, your in-person meetings are not going away either. And so similarly, I believe that every company and every employee in the company should have one or other form of work management software. Hopefully it's mine, right? But it could be some other. But that will definitely support and help more mobile and distributed team. But teams still need to get together, and there is something in it that we all appreciate. I
want to open up to some questions here from the audience. Question right here.
I know you were early in the SaaS development. I'm just curious if you started with a technology base and then you incurred a bunch of technical debt and then had to retrench, and if you've done that more than once, and how you handle that.
And sorry, I didn't hear it well enough. So your question is, how did we deal with technical debt over the years?
In other words, you were early doing SaaS, and so this whole, everything's evolved, the tools have evolved, and I'm just curious if you had to incur a bunch of technical debt because you used what was available, and then you saw the shiny new object, and how did you handle that? And was it like, have you done that repeatedly, or did you stake out a technical roadmap for long term and just jump on that?
So it's a very, very good, very insightful question. We did, if you look at our code base, there's not only no single line that was written at the beginning, it's probably like twice that, right? But also very importantly, we never, like, I'm not a believer in revolutions, and maybe that's my background. You know, I've been growing up in a country that gets screwed up by revolution. So I'm believer in evolution, if you will. So we never like stopped the development and said, okay, next 2 years we're going to work on this super beautiful, super fast, super new platform. It was always more of grind and pain of saying, okay, we still got to deliver on what our customers need and want from us, and we're going to find time to, in the process, rewrite bits and blocks of our software platform using technologies that are appropriate. And today we run on very modern stack. Like I think most of the startups still not there yet. Like our front end, we actually code in Dart, right? And we were using Mongo very early on, right? Although right now we're migrating off it. So our stack is fairly modern. We never, luckily me and kind of key technical guys, by that time we were kind of weathered, if you will. So it's not never about the next shiny object. So it's always a lot of devil's advocates talk internally, like, hey, do we really want to do it? Like everybody can promise like these gains, but are we gonna really gonna see it? We do prototyping, we do this. So it's very deliberate. It's if you compare by the notion of like new college graduate, fairly slow upgrades, but actually at the large scale, again, we're running on a stack that's more modern than a lot of startups today. So that continuous flywheel motion gets us there. And I guess I was influenced a lot. There was a popular blogger about a decade ago or a little bit more, Joe Spolsky, who later co-founded Trello and Stack Overflow. So he was a pretty popular guy, and he comes from Microsoft, and he wrote a blog post on how they royally screwed up by rewriting, I forgot, was it Excel or Microsoft Explorer or something like that, where they lost a lot of time to market. And so I kind of internalized that. I also saw it in a couple of projects that I was involved, how bad those rewrites could get the company into, despite all the best intentions. So we always powered through it and done it incrementally.
Question here in the middle.
Hi, I have a question. I think Matt was saying that you were 5 or 6 years bootstrapping. So does it mean that you were negative, you were not cash flow positive, or how did you get the fund for bootstrapping for 5 or 6 years? That's a long time. I guess that's my question.
So for several years, I self-funded the company. As I mentioned, my previous company was profitable, right? So it was more of a continuous funding rather than a lump sum. And then at some point, I cut that because I figured, okay, like we now kind of our wings have grown a little bit, and so let's see if we can make it on our own supply. And so just funded it through the revenue. Originally, but it was less of a cash and more of a engineering resources, if you will. It's more of a sort of more of a labor investment, and a lot of startups could go through that phase through co-founders, so kind of early employees who are moonlighting or working for equity or things like that. So I did more in the self-funding mode, where a lot of them were paid for rather than working for equity or idea. But the idea is the same. You power through up until launch. You get an initial revenue, and then at some point there's enough revenue to say, okay, now we're kind of sustainable.
Question over here.
Yeah, top 3 or top 5 books that you would recommend for reading?
Oh my God, I read a lot, so there are tons of books I'd recommend. If you ask me more specifically on which topic, then I could give you a better answer.
Or any product on entrepreneurship.
So books for entrepreneurship. I know on the product side, I like to read cognitive sciences stuff. So both very direct, kind of like hooked, to more theoretical, like Thinking Fast and Slow, or there on the marketing side, Cialdini is great. Like Persuasion is his latest work. He wrote The Influence, which was very influential, pun intended. I love Jim Collins, although I know that he's been dethroned sort of by stats, but I still think his ideas on leadership are very on point. And his latest book, which I didn't learn much from, but it very much reflective of my philosophy, kind of testing and iterating. I read the classics, their Innovator's Dilemma, which I think is important for everybody to understand. Their Crossing the Chasm, although I felt I'm smarter than it. I've read it, and I'm like, nah, I'm smarter. I'm just gonna go just horizontal. Just who cares, right? Eventually, I figure out that it's as usual. You're not necessarily as smart as you think. So it's a good book. Although again, I wish the latest edition focused a little bit more on horizontal products, because there's a lot of successes in the market like Oz, Box, and many others that's gone to market horizontally. So I don't think Crossing the Chasm reflects that. So I read a lot and could give more specific advice.
Question in the front here.
So going back to the bootstrap question, so it looks like you had a services company that was funding the product company. So question number one is, how did you fight the market perception that you're a services company trying to become a product company? Did you have to address that?
It was a complete separation. So the brand and everything was completely different.
Okay.
So as a customer, you wouldn't know that where the funding comes from.
Right. And once you started the product company, did you kind of divest on the services side and completely focus on the product side? Or
exactly, yeah. At some
okay.
point, I've switched full-time from their services business and let my co-founder of that business and management of that business completely run it, and just said, okay, I'm all in. This is my passion. This is what I love doing. I want to spend all my time here.
Okay, question in the middle here.
Could you share your philosophy on, as you're ramping up, as you're getting your early customers, how much of that product vision is coming from your observation of the space and what should happen versus feedback you're getting from, as you're adding customers and they may not be all of the same type, so they have different needs, and so how do you keep your product vision or morph it, but like keep it tight so that it's not like all things to all people?
I'm personally very, very, very customer driven. Now, when you have thousands of customers, that still gives you a lot of flexibility, because ultimately you get 10,000 different asks, and it's on you to define what you want to. Whatever idea you have, there's a high probability that there is a customer ask than asking for that. So at some point you can fit the data to your vision, but I always, at least philosophically, I'm a big believer in the fact that you need to validate your ideas, and I feel some of the product mistakes we made were because we didn't validate enough. Luckily, some of their stuff that we didn't validate still became like very key in the markets. They were both some UX ideas that later became like standard how the whole category works, and there's like literally hundreds of products that work that way. Like I can give you example I'm personally proud of. So back in the day, if you remember, there were wiki pages with kind of version history. And then there were like websites which you could comment on, like again, Basecamp, SharePoint, and web forums. And at some point, I thought of merging the two. I'm like, okay, if the changes are happening, just put them in the same feed as the comments are. And I don't know if there are other people who were thinking the same way, or if it's kind of spread through the industry, but now it's de facto standard. Like at least in our category, you've got, if you're working on tasks or projects, you would get the feed that reflects the changes instead of like version history here and comments there. So there are a lot of those ideas, but again, a lot of their roadmap is very, very heavily influenced by our customers. And your job as a product, the toughest job as a product manager is not that. The toughest job is to actually go deeper and say, no, you know what? this is great, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to live with 80% of that. And I'm sorry, but it's all going to be all right, okay? Believe me, trust me, but I'm only going to give you 80%, and it's going to be a little bit different, but I'm going to do it because then it will help 15,000 other customers to do their job as well. So that is tough.
We got time for one more question here.
Sergey, first of all, congratulations with such a tremendous achievement so far. And question, maybe you will have some magic answer to it, but what would you recommend to people that are trying to bootstrap their startups today? Basically having a family and their life and like sustaining their living. Like any wisdom, any insights there?
Well, as you said, there's no magical answer. Whatever I tell you will be fairly generic. So there's no easy or super insightful answer. If you find where the value is, right, you either kind of moonlight or you quickly get there before you burn through your savings. And again, if you're coming from the heavy enterprise background, then it's easier because you can actually pre-sell the deck before you build it, right? So and sometimes you can even collect that money before you build it. So in the heavy enterprise space, which I'm not from, like we come bottoms up, land and expand. So in the heavy enterprise space, you can fund it through the customer right away. If you're growing bottom up or consumer, there's gonna be some source of labor. Either you're moonlighting or you're living off your savings, or you're living off investor money, but there's got to be some work put into the product before it can generate value.
Good. I wanted to keep it under an hour here, but I know that we had some more questions, and maybe Andrew might hang out for a little bit more and answer some of those afterwards if you would like, that is. But wanted to say we just have a couple more events coming up next week, so feel free to look out for those. And wanted to say, Andrew, thanks again for spending your Wednesday with us. We really appreciate it. I learned a lot, and I hope everybody did too. And let's give him another warm round of applause for that. Thanks, Andrew.